The New Thing, a Silicon Valley story by Michael Lewis. Hello and welcome. I'm really glad you're here with me today. Picture this for a moment. You're standing on the deck of a sailboat in the middle of the night, somewhere in the North Sea. It's December. The wind is screaming at 70 miles an hour, and waves as tall as buildings are slamming into the bow, sending icy spray 30 feet into the air. Now, this isn't just any sailboat. This is the Hyperion, the largest single-masted sailboat ever built. A stunning white vessel stretching nearly 160 feet long, with a mast that shoots 189 feet into the sky, like a tower of crosses against an angry gray sky. And on this boat, in this insane storm, a German television soundman has dropped to his knees, crawled to the railing, and is throwing up into the churning sea. But even while he's retching, he lifts his microphone into the air to capture the roar of the storm. He's got a job to do, after all. You might assume this is about testing a boat, but you'd be completely wrong. As the Dutch shipbuilder, Walter Huisman, mutters to himself with a look of pure dread on his face, it is weather to test people, not boats. And where's the guy responsible for all this madness? The man who dreamed up this impossible computerized monster of a ship. He's not on deck with everyone else, white-knuckling the rails. Nope. He emerges from below, where he's been tinkering with his computer, and crawls along the violently pitching deck. He makes his way to the bow, puts a hand on the base of his giant, swaying mast, this towering symbol of his ambition, and just looks up. What's he looking for? Nobody has a clue. He's not really thinking. He's groping, searching for what comes next. That man is Jim Clark. And that scene, that perfect storm of ambition, technology, and human drama, is really the heart of Michael Lewis's brilliant book, The New Thing. This isn't just another business book or tech story. It's about a very particular type of person, the kind who lives right at the edge of what's possible, always starting new things. Someone who can't stand the world as it is, and has this relentless, almost painful need to change it. By the time we're done here today, you'll understand the mindset of the person who, more than almost anyone else, lit the fuse on the internet boom. You'll see how one man's impatience, his restlessness, and his hunger for a strange kind of revenge didn't just make him a billionaire 3 times over. It fundamentally rewrote the rules of capitalism and shaped the digital world we're all living in right now. So let's dive in. Let's sail into the turbulent world of Jim Clark and his never-ending hunt for the new thing. To really get Jim Clark's story, you first need to understand what he was fighting against. Back in the 1950s, the ideal American businessman was what a writer named William White called the organization man. This was a guy in a gray flannel suit, working for some enormous, stable corporation, like IBM or AT&T. His highest virtue? Conformity. He believed in the group over the individual, and his whole goal was to fit in, to be a quote, well-rounded man. Brilliance was actually kind of suspicious. Words like eccentric or introvert were basically career killers. The whole system was designed to file down the sharp edges of human personality. Jim Clark was nothing but sharp edges. His story doesn't begin in a boardroom. It starts in Plainview, Texas, a town so flat and colorless it seemed designed to crush imagination. Clark described his childhood as growing up in, quote, black and white, thinking the whole world was just a pile of dirt, and he was sitting right in the middle of it. His father was a violent drunk who abandoned the family. His mother worked constantly, but they were seriously poor. At school, Clark was a troublemaker. He smuggled a skunk into a school dance, set off firecrackers in lockers, and finally got expelled for telling a teacher to go to hell. He seemed headed absolutely nowhere. At 17, he escaped by joining the Navy, and this is where things get really interesting. The Navy gave him an aptitude test, but Clark, Having never seen a multiple-choice test before, didn't realize you were only supposed to pick one answer. When several answers seemed right, he just circled them all. The Navy accused him of cheating and stuck him on a track for juvenile delinquents, shipping him out to sea for 9 months of the most disgusting jobs you can imagine. But something happened during that whole humiliating experience. He came back with a burning desire for revenge, not petty revenge, but something much deeper. He discovered that for him, success was the ultimate form of revenge. He took his first math class and scored the highest grade. The Navy, surprised, tested him again. Same result. This kid, who was supposedly unfit for high school, had this incredible, natural gift for mathematics and logic. Within 8 years, the high school dropout had earned a Ph.D. in computer science. But the academic world couldn't contain him either. He bounced between jobs, got fired for insubordination, and by age 38 he found himself in a dark place. His second wife had just left him, saying she couldn't live his way anymore. She wanted something more stable. He'd been fired. He was a failure. He remembered thinking, my God, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this hole. And then, in a moment of what he called self-imposed psychology, he transformed. He developed this maniacal passion to achieve something. It was like he decided overnight to reinvent himself completely. He was a professor at Stanford at the time, tinkering with a special computer chip. Suddenly, the best graduate students were flocking to him, wanting to be part of what he was building. That project was his first new thing. He called it the geometry engine. Here's the thing. Back in 1979, computer graphics were pretty crude. Clark had this simple but powerful insight. The world is three-dimensional, so the computer world would have to be too. The geometry engine was a chip that could process 3D graphics in real time, essentially giving computers the gift of sight. It was magical, and almost nobody saw it coming. He offered to license his invention to the giants of that era: IBM, Hewlett-Packard, DEC. They all turned him down. One engineer from Lockheed watched a demonstration of a car being designed in 3D on the screen and said, "That might be good for designing cars, but I design airplanes," completely missing the point that this technology could be used to design absolutely everything. But Hollywood got it. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas came calling. The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, the mind-bending special effects that would define movies for the next couple of decades, they all came from that little chip Clark and his students built at Stanford. So Clark did what any ambitious person in his position would do. He started a company. He called it Silicon Graphics, or SGI. He attracted the best and brightest engineers in the world, people who left safe jobs at places like Bell Labs and Xerox PARC, because they saw the future in what Clark was building. SGI became a huge success. But here's where that old conflict came roaring back. To build the company, Clark needed money. He went to the venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, the financiers who bankrolled Silicon Valley. He ended up selling a huge chunk of his company for what seemed like very little. As the company grew more and more successful, he and his engineers, the actual creators, found themselves owning less and less. The power shifted to the money men and the professional managers they brought in to run things. And the man they brought in was the perfect example of the organization man, Ed McCracken, a star executive from Hewlett-Packard. McCracken was everything Clark wasn't. He wore suits. He loved consensus. He spoke in this smooth, professional, slightly artificial tone. He looked at Clark's team of brilliant, argumentative engineers and decided they didn't need a CEO. They needed a therapist. What followed was one of the great culture clashes in corporate history. McCracken hired a corporate psychologist and sent the entire senior team on a 3-day retreat. They were given personality tests that labeled them as supportive, analytical, promoter, or controller. McCracken was a weak analytical. Clark and almost every single engineer he'd hired were strong controllers. Another test sorted them into personality types on a pie chart. All the engineers landed in a single tiny slice of the pie, one the psychologist had labeled highly oppositional. The engineers wore it like a badge of honor. To them, oppositional just meant standing your ground when you knew you were right. But to McCracken and the financiers, it was a problem that needed managing. Slowly, methodically, they pushed Jim Clark to the sidelines. He was the chairman, the founder, the visionary, but he had no real power. In his own company, he was a disruptive force that needed to be contained. This drove Clark absolutely crazy. It wasn't just about money. It was a deep, philosophical insult. He believed with every fiber of his being that the people who create the new recipes, the brilliant engineers, were the ones who mattered most. He saw the venture capitalists and the managers as parasites, bottom feeders clinging to the great white shark of innovation, and now the bottom feeders were running the show. As SGI became more successful, Clark became more miserable. He saw another storm on the horizon that nobody else noticed: the personal computer. He knew that Moore's law, the principle that computing power doubles roughly every 18 months while its price drops by half, meant that one day, cheap PCs would be able to do everything his expensive SGI workstations could do. Microsoft would eventually eat their lunch. He practically screamed at McCracken and the board that SGI had to cannibalize itself. They had to build a cheap, low-end product to compete with the PC, even if it destroyed their profitable high-end business. If you don't destroy yourself, he argued, someone else will. But big, successful companies hate that kind of thinking. It goes against every instinct for self-preservation. They ignored him. And so Clark retreated into another dark place. He found himself a man with a title, a fortune, but no purpose. He started flying model helicopters in his front yard. He bought a motorcycle and rode it way too fast, eventually shattering his leg in a crash. And he bought a sailboat and started teaching himself to program it, calling young Indian engineers at SGI, like Pavan Nigam and Kittu Kalluri, from the middle of the ocean to help him fix bugs in his code. He was escaping. He was groping again, looking for what was next. Lying in bed with his broken leg, he wrote a paper outlining his new vision. He called it the telecomputer. The idea was to turn the television set into a computer, bypassing Microsoft's stranglehold on the PC. It would be a virtual VCR, delivering movies on demand. He believed this was the new thing. It wasn't, but it was pretty close. He pitched the idea to Time Warner, and they loved it. They agreed to pay SGI millions to build a pilot system for an interactive television service in Orlando, Florida. Suddenly, every major media and tech company, AT&T, Microsoft, Oracle, jumped into the interactive TV craze. Clark had, once again, pointed toward the future. But just as the project got going, Ed McCracken took it over and pushed Clark out of the picture. It was the final humiliation. In early 1994, Jim Clark walked out of the company he founded. He was wealthy, sure, but defeated. He told his friends he was going to show them all. He was going to get seriously rich this time. He was going to invent a new role for himself, one where the creator, the person with the idea, wins. Not the financiers, not the managers, the guy who finds the new thing. He didn't know what it was yet, but he was desperate to find it, and to do that he knew he needed smart engineers. He reached out to a brilliant, cocky, 22-year-old kid from the University of Illinois named Mark Andreessen. Andreessen and his friends had written a piece of software in college called Mosaic, the world's first popular web browser, a simple tool that let you navigate the strange, chaotic world of the Internet. At first, Clark and Andreessen talked about building applications for the interactive television world. That's where all the big money and smart people were heading. But one day, sitting at Clark's kitchen table, Andreessen casually mentioned, "We could always build a Mosaic killer." And in that moment, everything clicked. The Internet, not television. The Internet was the thing. It was slow, it was clunky, but millions of people were using it, and the numbers were doubling every year. Clark realized he was looking at the personal computer all over again, back when it was brand new. This was the real thing that could challenge Microsoft. He was off and running down another dark tunnel, but this time he had a feeling it had no end. He and Andreessen hired all the original Mosaic programmers from Illinois and formed a new company. First, they called it Mosaic Communications, then changed the name to Netscape. And this is where Jim Clark didn't just build a company, he rewrote the rules of capitalism itself. He went back to the venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, but this time he was calling the shots. He went to the most famous venture capitalist in the Valley, John Dewar of Kleiner Perkins. Dewar, at the time, was reeling from some bad bets on pen computing and interactive TV. Clark had actually rescued him from that dead end. Clark made him an offer that was absolutely unheard of. He essentially told Dewar, "My dollars are worth 3 times what yours are worth." He was valuing his own idea and his team of 7 recent college graduates at a staggering $18 million. Any other venture capitalist would have laughed him out of the room, but Dewar, sensing he was looking at the future, agreed on the spot. It was a defining moment. For the first time, the power had decisively shifted from the financier to the creator. The engineer with the concept was now king. What followed was a blur. 18 months after its founding, before it had made a single dollar of profit, Clark pushed for Netscape to go public. His CEO, a seasoned executive named Jim Barksdale, thought it was crazy. But Clark had the power now. On August 9, 1995, Netscape sold its shares to the public. It was, as Lewis calls it, the Great Brain Quake. The stock, offered at $12 a share, rocketed to $48 on the first day. 3 months later, it was at $140. The Netscape IPO changed everything. It created a completely new business model. You didn't need profits anymore. You just needed rapid growth and a compelling story about the future. A company's past became a liability. What mattered was its state of pure possibility. Suddenly, the entire U.S. stock market had adopted the personal psychology of Jim Clark. It also unleashed a tidal wave of wealth. Microsoft was 12 years old before people talked about Microsoft millionaires. Netscape was 1.5. Young engineers who had joined the company just months before were suddenly worth $10 million. Mark Andreessen, at 24, was worth $80 million. And Clark himself, who made sure he kept the biggest stake, became Silicon Valley's newest billionaire. The effect on the Valley was electric. Every engineer suddenly saw their job not just as work, but as a high-stakes bet on the future. They looked at the guys at Netscape, who many considered the B team, and thought, why not me? Silicon Valley became a giant casino, and everyone was looking for the next number to bet on. And the person everyone looked to, the person who seemed to know the future, was Jim Clark. Of course, with great success came powerful enemies. As Clark had predicted, Microsoft came after them hard. They used their monopoly power to try and crush Netscape, leading to the famous antitrust trial. But for Clark, that was already yesterday's news. The moment Netscape went public, he was already searching for the next thing. He found it in his own frustration. Diagnosed with a rare blood disease, he was forced to go to the hospital and was absolutely infuriated by the endless bureaucracy and paperwork. He saw another massive broken system ripe for disruption, the $1.50 trillion U.S. healthcare industry. He drew a simple diagram on a piece of paper, a diamond connecting doctors, patients, payers, and providers. In the middle, he put a star. That star was his next company, Healthscape, later renamed Healtheon. He went back to the venture capitalists, and, this time, the terms were even more astonishing. He wouldn't run the company. He wouldn't even work there. He was now a quote 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 quote. His job was to have the idea. Others would do the actual work. He just wanted to get back to his boat. And they agreed, because Jim Clark now had the Midas touch. He recruited Pavan Nigam, the brilliant engineer from SGI, to lead the technical team. The day Pavan resigned from SGI, his home fax machine was flooded with over 300 resumes from engineers who wanted to join him, even though none of them had any idea what the new company even did. They just knew it was Jim Clark's next new thing, and that was enough. Healtheon's journey was rocky. The first attempt to go public failed spectacularly during a market crash in 1998. The venture capitalists thought the company was worthless. Clark, seeing their hesitation, offered to fund the entire company himself with another $40 million of his own money. It was a massive game of chicken, and the VCs, terrified of missing out on the next Netscape, blinked. They threw their money in. A few months later, the market roared back. Healtheon went public, and its value exploded to over $3 billion on the first day. Pavan Nigam became worth $33 million, and Jim Clark added another $375 million to his fortune. He'd done it again. Which brings us back to the boat, the Hyperion. All this time, through all these deals, Clark's real passion project was this magnificent, maddening, computerized yacht. It was his laboratory and his escape. It was the physical expression of his philosophy, a complete, self-contained world, controlled by a computer. A world where he could finally impose the perfect logic he craved. But even perfection was temporary. As the book ends, Clark has just sailed the Hyperion across the Atlantic. He's standing in his cabin with Monet and Picasso's on the walls, and on his desk is not a souvenir from the trip, but an architectural drawing. It's a drawing of a new boat. A sailboat half again as big as the one he's on. Hyperion is a beautiful boat, he says, but this new one, this will be the perfect boat. And in that one word, but, you find the engine of Jim Clark, the sweet, painful, never-ending feeling that what is isn't quite good enough, the itch that can never be scratched, the relentless, glorious, and deeply human search for the new thing. So what do we take away from this incredible story? It's way more than just a tale of a rich man getting richer. It's a deep look at the nature of innovation, personality, and the chaotic engine of progress. The first lesson is about the power of dissatisfaction. Jim Clark was driven by a deep and lasting unhappiness with the way things were. He was unhappy with his childhood, unhappy with the Navy, unhappy with the rules of business. But unlike most people, he didn't just complain. He channeled that dissatisfaction into ferocious energy to build something new. He shows us that progress doesn't come from contentment. It comes from people who look at the world and think, this could be better. They're the ones willing to tear everything down to build it up again. The second lesson is about the role of the outsider. Clark was never an insider. Even after he became a billionaire, he was temperamentally an outsider. He didn't play by the established rules because he didn't respect them. This outsider perspective was his superpower. It allowed him to see opportunities that the organization men, the people comfortable within the system, could never see. He wasn't burdened by conventional wisdom. In fact, his ignorance of an industry, like healthcare, was often an advantage. It meant he wasn't afraid to propose something that experts would immediately dismiss as impossible. And finally, this story teaches us something powerful about value. For decades, capitalism had a clear hierarchy. Money came first. The financiers, the bankers, the venture capitalists, they held the power. Jim Clark, through sheer force of will, flipped that upside down. He argued, and then proved, that the most valuable thing in the modern economy is the idea, the new thing. He made the world recognize that the true source of wealth isn't capital, it's human imagination. The engineer, the creator, the highly oppositional geek in the basement, he made them the new royalty. So as you think about your own path, what can you learn from Jim Clark? You don't have to build $3 billion companies, but you can cultivate that same spirit of productive impatience. When you see something that's broken, that's inefficient, that just doesn't make sense, don't just accept it. Get curious. Get irritated. Ask yourself, What if there's a better way? That question is the seed of every new thing. Start with the small things in your own life. Your study habits, a process at a part-time job, the way your sports team practices. Look for the friction, the waste, that's just how we do things, and then dare to imagine something better. That was a summary of The New Thing by Michael Lewis. We've journeyed through the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a great adventure. It can show you where it went, but it can't make you feel the sea spray or the thrill of the climb. The real magic happens when you read the book for yourself. It's in those quiet moments, when one of Lewis's perfectly crafted sentences, or a single wild story about Clark, hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is a map, designed to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity, I really encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the world of innovation and the restless spirit that drives it. Also, if this journey today has given you something valuable to think about, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.